This is a production of Cornell University.
Okay. My name is Nina Bassick. I know most of you for quite a few years. And I'm the faculty member of the Department of Horticulture. I work in the field of urban horticulture, which I thought before we get into this study, I'd like to just give you a little perspective on where this study fits into a larger whole. To my knowledge, I've been here over 31 years, so there's a bit of a history of kind of the research I've been doing, and this is a logical outcome of some of the things we've been working on. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of a brief background and then go launch into this study on ground penetrating radar. So research that I work on primarily is dealing with urban landscape establishment, and for most of that time it really means urban tree establishment, street trees, and the most difficult types of sites that you might consider. And so everything that I do fits into 4 different areas. First, trying to understand the site constraints, the abiotic site constraints, and opportunities that might exist on the site in terms of soil compaction, limited soil volume, poor drainage, high pH, all the different things that you might consider might be there and are there. And then trying to make good plant selections for those difficult site conditions, matching the plant to the site conditions. Very often we find that the sites can be so limiting that we have to do some site modification. We have to do, which basically is talking about soil modification that we have to do to enable trees to grow at all, to achieve their functional abilities in the urban environment. And then finally, transplanting. A lot can happen between getting the tree in the nursery and then getting it to the site and the first couple of years after transplanting. So this whole kind of 4-step process is where my research encompasses. And of course, some of these things talk to each other. If you have a better site, you can have more plant selection. If you have a poor site, your plant selection palette's going to be more limited. So what I'm going to be speaking today mostly is about some of the issues in site modification and how we look at roots in difficult sites. So some of the work we started doing in the early 1990s was looking at how much soil you need, or how the roots grow in very difficult sites like this, paved sites where you might have 4x5 openings in the street, and that tree is going to go in there, and we're going to hope for the best, but these trees don't often live very long. Sometimes they do, and we're not sure why. And so we tried to look at some of these most difficult downtown urban sites to see what was going on. And part of the issue is that, sure, it's a small opening, but there's soil under there. But what you may not know is that when you have to lay pavement on soil, you have to purposely compact that soil first so it's load-bearing, so the pavement won't subside or shift or fail. So this is just an example of the purposeful compaction that happens to soil under pavement, any pavement. And then you can see here what happened. Here's the tree area. This is reinforced. There's concrete going to go over and top. And there's really nothing that's different about this versus this. So we have a very restricted rooting situation, and trees respond to that. And here I say the tree's being lowered into the coffin, and we often just, that's maybe the extent of the usable soil that the tree has to grow it. So it's not surprising that these trees languish, they don't grow very well, and die early. And we see examples of that all over the place. If you start looking around, you'll see the nature of compacted soils and compacted root zones. When a tree goes over, it's always a great opportunity to look at where the roots are. We know that roots are fairly shallow within the top meter of the soil, and even less when you get into urban situations where there's so much more compaction. And we've used our handy-dandy air excavation tool. This is an air spade we use to uncover roots because we've been looking to see about root growth in urban environments for many years, and it's been very difficult to study. If any of you have ever tried to measure roots in normal soil, you know it's difficult. Now we're dealing with soil, roots under pavement, and it's really, really difficult. But sometimes we've been able to take up the concrete. Here's a tree lawn where some pretty big trees, and you can see where the roots grow underneath that 4 inches of concrete. Talk about a meter's depth of roots grow. We'd like to have a meter's. Typically, these roots grow very, very superficially, 4 inches, 5 inches. And then they're making their way to somebody's front yard, and the tree's going to get what it needs. There's no way the tree really could survive in this small strip, so it makes its way into somebody's front yard and gets the volume that it needs. And so we spent many years figuring out how much soil you need to support a tree to allow it to get to its envisioned design size. When you plant a tree, you have an envisioned design size and functions that go along with that. And so we did some work in the mid-1990s, early 1990s, coming up with models that figured out how much soil do you need in this location, with this precipitation, with this water holding capacity of the soil, and this size tree. And I'm not going to go into this, but we have some models that are pretty good approximations, which we hope to get better at modeling the amount of soil needed to grow a tree to what you envision it. So one of the things we knew we needed to do was find more volume safely. We needed to find more volume under these paved areas, parking lots, sidewalks. And we developed something called CU structural soil, or structural soil, which is a conceptual, you might have heard of that. It's now 15 years old. It's a patented material that Cornell patents. It's now over 1,200 installations all around the country, and Canada, and Europe, and so on. So basically what it amounts to is this is crushed stone, about 1 inch diameter, and we use a proportion of stone to soil so that the stone is touching stone, so that if you put a compactive effort on this, push down on it, the stone is going to create a rigid lattice, a rigid skeleton, but you're going to have large pore sizes because of the one size stone, and you can fill those pores with soil and basically meet the engineer's problems in terms of having compaction, but still allow tree roots to go through this soil. You see the concept there? It's a structural soil, rigid lattice with soil in the pores. Roots kind of shoot through this thing like Swiss cheese. So we've been working on this for many years, and this is the way we use it in a sidewalk situation where here's a curb in your street, and you might have an opening where the tree goes, but underneath that sidewalk, even to the building face, we could have a lot of volume found by use of structural soil. You wouldn't see it. In fact, in Ithaca, it's the structural soil capital of the world. There's more structural soil underground, which you never see, but than anywhere else. Although the state that has the most numerous structural soil installations is California. So, 1997, with this long meadow street here, the road was narrowed as it became one way, and this whole strip here is structural soil being put in, and then trees went in after that, and that's what this is agway here. So you can see these Acer campestris growing in structural soil with porous paving, basically just block paving, enabling those trees to grow where otherwise it would be a pretty difficult situation. And there's all over town also. So now let's get to the study. So looking at developing all this work in terms of structural soil and where roots grow and finding enough volume, we really wanted to see where the roots were growing to see how successful we've been in terms of tree growth. We can measure the tops of the trees, but we really wanted to see what was happening below ground. So in 2003, we put in this, at Bluegrass Lane, we put in these what are called sidewalks to nowhere, where we dug down about 1 meter, took the soil out, and we had some strips which were compacted. We put the soil back in and compacted it in lifts or layers, so it would be similar to what you'd see in a compacted street environment. We lined it with very heavy milled plastic, so hopefully it would contain the soil and the roots. We have 6 trenches like this, which we dug. Some of them had just compacted silt loam, compacted to a very high engineering level, which would be for silt loam about 1.8, which would be exceptionally difficult and basically prevent root penetration. And structural soil was also put in some of these trenches, also compacted to the engineering standard, which is actually higher, about 1.97 or almost 2.0 bulk density, and yet the tree roots can really access this, even though it is so compacted, because of that dual nature of stone to soil. So here's Jeff, basically compacting the soil so that we would have different trenches of different soil types. And then we put a base layer of stone on top of everything. This is not structural soil. This is just a base layer of stone, which we put under concrete anyway, just to increase the drainage. And then we paved the whole thing. And within these openings here, we have clonal, well, at least the cyans are clonal. This is Acer platanoides Emerald Queen, which we planted in 2003, just lightly branched whips. The cyans are clonal that grafted onto seedling rootstocks. Fast forward, 2008, trees are growing. Trees are growing differently in different soils, which is what we expected. Here's in a compacted soil, and you say, well, that's not so bad. But if you go compare that to the structural soil one right next to it, it's different. Okay, so we're measuring root growth. We have this long-term study, so we can manipulate, look at things as they occur in these different plantings areas. So when it came about that same time, I went to a trade show as part of the International Society of Arboriculture, and I saw this person talking about tree root radar that you could actually find roots, locate roots underground in the soil or under pavement, and I was like, my eyes just like, oh, this is amazing, you know. So I'm talking to him, I said, yeah, wow, I really love to test your material and see if it would work, and you know, really what we're looking for, great tool. And it took a while, but we decided to do a study where we'd actually do a ground truth. In other words, do our radar on these very uniform trees on the two different soil types, and then do a total excavation of those root systems to see that what we saw actually was what the radar saw, or how close they were. How good was it? In other words, I saw the pretty pictures at the booth, but I wanted to see for myself that this was actually going to work, because that's an expensive little toy, and no sense working on it if it's not going to be accurate. So this is our souped-up tricycle, ground penetrating radar machine. That's the guts of it. It's a $35,000 tricycle. So it's nothing that I own. So I work with an arborist who is very well versed in using this. Goes all around the country locating different things underground for various people, and especially roots where they might be impacting utilities or construction, and has quite a bit of experience. And his name is Gary Raffel from Dynamic Tree Seed. So this is how basically it works. You've got your, oops, let's go back, forward. You've got your radar, basically electromagnetic waves are transmitted into the ground. These are the green bars here, waves if you like. And when it comes in contact with some object, those waves will be reflected or refracted back in a predictable way. Okay, that's basically the idea behind it. And it can go over ground or over pavement. And then you get basically a virtual trench. Here is the length, and this is depth. And these X's represent detected roots. Okay? So the important thing is how can we detect roots here? It's called the dielectric. And this is just something that needs to be explained for a minute. So when you have the electromagnetic waves coming down into any kind of situation, the object, whether it's soil or roots, will have something called a dimensionless quality called the dielectric, which is how that material responds in an electric field. So obviously metals and things with high conductivity will respond very rapidly, but all materials respond to some level. And the bigger the difference between two objects within an area will give a high dielectric, which gives you better radar response. So to make it clear, in the way of roots are basically water, right? The dielectric of water is 81, and the dielectric of typical soils is 13. So that's a high difference between water and typical soils. And we actually, this has to be calibrated in the field, and we do this. And so when you have a high difference between one type of object and another, you have a high dielectric and you can get a good radar response. That is the general idea of what we're working with. So here we are at our field again, and so we had basically, this is measures about 24 inches between the wheels, and we went up one side of the pad and then up another side of the pad, and then we did lines across. So we would go up here, and then go do lines across. We get a virtual trench or root detection from the machine. And now, you see on top, by the way, I didn't take a picture of it, there's a screen, so you actually can see while you're walking and it's measuring that you can see, you can detect roots, although that's not the data that comes out, it's just an idea that something is there. And what you see is a parabola. When you see a root, basically you see this nice parabola that say, whoa, I've got something there, and you can, but then the software basically sorts these things out and you get a printout. So we did this, and we can do it in different depth ranges. These trenches were 1 meter deep, but what you see here is 6.4 inches to 14 inches deep. And you saw these marks are just marking where the tree was, and so there are no roots. Actually, there's one root here in that 6.4 to 13.8 inch range for these different pads of trees. But then we get into the 13, almost 14 to 21 inch range. All these green square, green crosses are detected roots. And then we go deeper from 22 inches to 29 inches. These represent roots in the deeper layers of these trenches. So when you put it all together, it looks very pretty, hard, and this is basically the total number of roots in those areas. Okay, so here's a tree. This pink marks where the tree is here. And of course, we couldn't go right on top of the tree, but around the tree in these pads, which we had restricted because of this heavy no plastic, we could be assured that's where the roots were. And so what it looks like if you do the virtual trench, and here it's starting at 1 to 39 feet, and you can see basically the roots. Here's these lines represent trees, okay? There you, tree centers, okay? So you're riding along, and after the data is worked, we have these are the roots that are found around this tree, around this tree, around this tree, and the depth of them. So it looked pretty good. I mean, we were quite excited about this, but it still had to be ground truth. So now this is the fun part. So we had to actually excavate these trees in such a way that we keep them in the same orientation to then check whether the GPR corresponded to what I saw with my eyes. So we have these pads are 6 by 6, and our trees inside, and we had our base course and then our different soils down there. So this is what we did. JC on the backhoe here took off the pads, and then excavated around, took off the plastic so that we could use our air spade tool to excavate the root system. There's, you see roots in structural soil. This is what structural soil looks like. Okay, one side stone, you see roots growing through it on the side of the trench. And then with our air spade, we cleaned off the entire root system of 10 trees, 5 in structural soil and 5 in just compacted silt loam, with the air spade, so we removed the whole root system in one piece. We tried a few things before. We tried taking quadrants, and we just never could keep everything, where the roots were in space. So we decided to clean off the whole root system in one piece, which was took several hours to do this, but this is this nice, pressurized air that allows us to do this kind of work. And this is that. So that was a tree growing in structural soil. You can see this is Acer platanoides, Norway maple, very fibrous root system. This is 5 years of growth. And so here we have our tree in the compacted silt loam, and you can see the massive structure here. We compacted it. There's the tree growing with some weeds on top, and the root system basically never made it into that compacted silt loam. Where it did get out is that sometimes it found the edge of that plastic and it kind of made its way down the edge. But this is what the tree system would look like in that compacted so long. Yeah, very easy to have it. This took 20 minutes. The other one would took several hours to clean off. But that's a typical root system in compacted so long. So comparing the two together, the differences in growth we see are corresponding somewhat to the differences in root growth, and you have a very different system. So we had ground penetrating radar looking at these roots and these roots, 5 of each in these pads. So now the thing about ground penetrating radar, it does not really see very small diameter roots. Basically the work that's been done with it says it has to be basically a centimeter or bigger in diameter. So I got these roots up in the hoop house and I hoisted them up, and I had to now skeletonize them. Take off all those fine roots so that I'd only be left with roots of 1 centimeter diameter or bigger, which I then could put on a template and measure in the same orientation it had been in the field, and then get my counts, which I'll show you how I did that. So this was a little bit of work as well. And so again, I'm skeletonizing them to find out only basically the larger roots. And you can see it's just in structural soil. Sometimes the roots actually encapsulate the stone. It's always kind of interesting to see how roots grow through this medium. And then I had, a template of the opening of where the trees were planted, and I would put the tree there in the same orientation as in the field, and count roots outside of the opening. I missed a lot in the middle, but I had a lot. But that's not what we were measuring. We were measuring those outside. And it's sort of hard to see here. I should have painted the white, but it was really those roots outside that we were measuring with the ground penetrating radar. And so this is what I would come. This is a graph of a table of several tree roots, the ground penetrating radar. Here's tree number 63. And so we've broken into quadrants, of 8 quadrants around each tree. So here's the number of roots, 9, 2, and 5. Why we have 2 counts in the corners is because we had the longitudinal scans and we had the horizontal scans as well. So we had 2 counts for the corners where our scans overlap. But here are 8 quadrants around this tree. And if you look, this represents my visual, and we had 2 different people doing this. So someone was counting this, and I was counting this. So we weren't confounding, trying to make things a little bit better than we thought. So here's tree number 63 again, and I have 2, 9, 2. Here's 2 and 4, 9, 2 and 5, and 4 and 5, 6, 6, 2, 2 and 3, 8, 9, 5, 5 and 4. And we went, so it was looking pretty good. I mean, it wasn't exact, but it was looking pretty good. And so we had to take all this data and make some statistical sense out of it. And this is one way we started to look at it. So if we had the radar counts and the visual counts, if they were no difference between them, there would be a 0. And this is a nice little bell curve with just GPR and structural soil. Then we take our visual count, our excavated count, and we'd subtract the GPR count, and if it was bigger than the excavated count, we'd get a minus number. So we have, if I had 4 roots that I saw, and the GPR said it was 5 roots, it'd be minus 1, which means the GPR overestimated by 1 root. Okay? And likewise, when you're in the positive range, I said 4, and the GPR said 3, then we have 1 extra, so it would underestimate. But you can see that it's a pretty nice curve. We were pretty happy with this, that it seemed to not go too far afield. We had a couple of 3s or 4s that were that much different than my visual scan, but this was looking good. With the compacted silt loam, the GPR overestimated. So this is where they both coincided exactly, 4 roots to 4 roots. But the GPR overestimated, which means that it was bigger than my visual root considerably. Well, it wasn't that many roots, but it was consistently overestimating in that massive soil structure. So this is interesting. We thought about what was doing this, and I'll talk about that in a minute. We did some regressions. So we had 5 trees. It was 8 quadrants around each tree, so we had 40 counts. Now this is not 40 because there's some dots that are actually overlapping. But this represents the 40 counts for, this is structural soil radar count versus excavated root count. So if we're in a perfect world, it would be 1 to 1. But we have, basically the R squared was 0.86 for this, and we have a 95% confidence interval here. And so we think this is a pretty good estimate of reasonable agreement between GPR and the visual count. Now with the soil, compacted soil versus the visual, our R squared is 0.71, not as good as the structural soil. And we also saw, and when I look at the data, that GPR was overestimating slightly. So, and we also, basically, we still have a significant regression. It's still significantly finding those roots by GPR, and those correspond to the visual. We think what's happening in those massive soil structures is that we get very few of those big, nice roots that we found in structural soil that were over a centimeter apart. We found lots of very fine roots, but most of those were taken off during the process of skeletonizing. So what we think might be happening, which we have to look at, is that when you get lots of very fine roots together and kind of jammed together, the radar is probably seeing that as a root, as opposed to just one fine root out in the soil. When you get lots of that roots together, and I was taking them off in the skeletonizing process, and I probably in that sense actually took off what GPR was seeing. We'll have to test this, but it's I think a reasonable way of thinking about it. And there's been other research showing that in massive structures, massive soil structures, we don't get as good agreement between roots and GPR. So we thought, well, this is pretty good. So we thought, basically, based on this work, which is the paper has been accepted, this is going to be in print a couple of months from now. But we think we have enough information to say, I'm going to get a pretty good approximation of where the roots are under pavement by using this, and I don't have to ground truth everything. And yeah, I'm going to be, especially in structural soil or soil that has lots of pores, I'm going to have good agreement with the GPR and the actual root count. So we want to start using this to see where the roots are. So we're actually started using this already in different situations. Here you see a typical problem of trees growing in very small openings in the sidewalk, and a very serious problem of sidewalk upheaval, which is not so much a problem for the tree as a problem for the municipality. Someone trips and falls, and there's $1 million lawsuit. I mean, this is amazing amount of expensive for municipalities to deal with the liability that comes with people tripping and falling. Now that's the United States. By the way, I went, in Holland, where they have a different type of structural soil, they don't compact so much. They have very bumpy sidewalks in Amsterdam, and if someone tripped and fell, they would just say, you've got to walk more carefully. But in here, just better be more careful next time. But this is the United States. So in some places, it's millions and millions of dollars spent on this. So one of the things we wanted to do was to look at the possibility of creating breakout zones, places for roots to safely go under our sidewalk and access somebody's front yard or some other open volume soil. And on State Street, we have some very narrow tree lawns going down into toward the commons, and in 2004 we planted some clonal elm trees there, and we created breakout zones, taking out 2 squares of concrete 4 inches thick, excavating down 24 inches, put structural soil in, and then repaved, and replanted the tree. So what we're going to try to do is get these roots to go under and into this person's front yard without heaving the sidewalk, without making the roots so shallow. And some recent research just done, that just came out in the Journal of Arboriculture, shows that very definitely if you have a root that's down deeper, if your sidewalk is here and here's a root, and as that root expands radially to the point it can, that force will be dissipated over a much larger area than if you have a root right under the sidewalk. And so that's what we're trying to do, is get the roots deep so that if there's any movement, the whole sidewalk will move as one and not crack as often happens. So here's a State Street and our tree lawn. Here's our tree. And we did some scans. Here are the breakout zones. So 1, 2, 3, and then we had 4 in the lawn. This was to see that, this was 2009, to see if the roots had gotten here. And we also did one scan 5 where we started in the normal soil, and then we intersected the structural soil, then went back to the normal soil to see where the roots were. And we had a control tree on this side, which was planted at the same time, but there was no repaving there. It was just the tree in the normal situation. So this is some interesting thing, and the other thing that's really interesting about this, I can continue to do this again and again and again over time and see what's happening without disturbing the roots. So that's a real benefit of using this, because obviously, even when we had our air spade and we're doing all kinds of great root excavation, that was it. I mean, we couldn't really sort of put it all back. So this is very nice. So there's Gary with the tricycle scanning over the breakout zone in the sidewalk. And there's our 5-year-old Accolade elm. It's totally clonal material. And here's our trench. This is interesting. This is scan 5, where this is start of the breakout zone. Here's the breakout zone. And this is in normal soil without any structural soil, so you've got a couple of very superficial roots. Then when you hit the breakout zone, you get all this proliferation of roots down quite deep to, this must be at least 24 inches, 26 inches. And then when you come out of the breakout zone, the roots start to go superficial again. This is the control tree on the other side of the street, where basically you have not only very few roots, but they're typically more at the surface. So we have to look at this over time to see if we know we can get roots down there. We also have roots at the surface. So what's going to happen in terms of sidewalk heating? Is this going to make a difference in terms of the long-term health of the tree and also the integrity of the sidewalk? This is what it looks like from plan view. Here's our tree, scan 1. Here's a breakout zone. And this is in the grass. Okay, so here's where we started without the breakout zone. Here's roots in the breakout zone, and now we're out again. And here's our control tree. All the roots were at the surface. This is our middle level of roots. And again, very few roots in the middle level. And then the deep level of roots, we had nothing in the control tree and quite a lot in the structural soil. So roots grow to the entire depth of structural soil. It's engineered to be porous enough, yet have enough water holding capacity to allow roots to really shoot through that. And they obviously do really colonize that area. So, unfortunate name, CU structural soil. Roots per square foot, 4.7. These are the lines, 4.2, 4.6. These are the depths. The grass, the roots were already into the grass, about 2.3 roots per square foot. In our scan 5, which we started before the breakout zone, we had basically 0.9 roots per square foot. And when it hit the same scan, when it hit the structural soil, we had this big proliferation of roots. In our control, we had right on top of where the tree was, we had about 1.4 roots per square foot. So, it's not surprised that roots grow well in structural soil. We've known that for a long time, but we're looking to see whether we can engineer these situations where roots can find more volume safely without heaving the sidewalk. So I'll show you a couple other really quick examples of what we've been using. In fact, these are places you know. This is Green Star parking lot, right? Here it is. The train comes through twice a day, always at rush hour. And we planted, in 1997, we planted pyramidal black locust, because the train would prune them one way or another. So we figured we just make the tree be very narrow. And in 1997, you can see where that wheel is. There's a slightly different color here. We took off the asphalt, 15 feet wide and 60 feet long, parallel to the tracks. This is before we planted the trees. We went down and put structural soil in 30 inches deep, that whole area, compacted it, then relayed the asphalt. We left about an 18-inch opening there right next to the tracks. And in 1997, that's when we planted the trees. They're still there. They're quite a bit bigger than this picture shows. But we had a conference here a couple of years ago where we were talking to the folks about structural soil, and we decided to let's go look and see if the roots are where we think they are under the asphalt here. So we actually tore up some of this asphalt, and well, actually on top of the normal base and then on structural soil. So we excavated both there, and we also did a ground penetrating radar to see could we see any difference in the root growth in one area versus the other. So this is the scans. We did over some scans, 10, 11, 12, 14 were in structural soil, 13 and 15 were in the typical base course, right? So they were not structural soil. And then we actually opened up the sidewalk, and here you can see the extent of structural soil, and I know it's easy to see, but there are roots going all over the place here, the structural. And then when you get to our typical base, it's very, very few roots. And so what we found was, so that was pretty neat. So what we found with the ground penetrating radar is here's scan 12 and 14. This was ground penetrating radar. Here's the tree, and here's 18 feet, and here we get lots of roots, quite deep for that particular tree. And this is the scans 13 and 15, which were beyond where we had structural soil, and this was the root. There were a few roots, but very shallow and not very many roots in the area adjacent to structural soil. So the question is, how far could they go? I don't know. But this was giving us more information that this was a very useful technique, and especially when we could see things. And the last example I will show you is a project we're still working on. This is in Brooklyn, New York. This is a big park called McCarran Park. This is just a track, track that people use in the park. And in 1998, we planted 35 trees along Lorimer Street and Lorimer and Driggs, and we scanned all this area to see where the roots were, because we put structural soil in too. So this is 3 years. That's the area next to the park. The structural soil went about 7 feet out, not the entire width, about in the middle of this pad, all the way to the deep wall that's here. So the trees, we have 3 different species here, and this is after 8 years in that, and then 2011 years. And so these are big trees now. And so we have Gary there doing scanning along this to see how much root growth we have and how deep. Now it's interesting, we only, the city, New York City only put in 24 inches, which is our minimum depth for structural soil. But as we're going through 35 trees and looking at, we can actually tell the difference between structural soil and normal soil, because the structural soil has a different dielectric. It's 9, regular soil is 13. And we can see a difference on the scan. And at one point, someone, the contractor, basically stinted on structural soil and went back, and so we got a place where they didn't put in 24 inches. We saw it. They put in whatever, 9 inches, and then they went back. So I don't know who the contractor was, but so there's some truth there. So we're now looking at 1 foot, 3.5 foot, and 5 foot from the tree, and we've got a tremendous amount of data to go through to actually figure out how much root growth and how much, in all these different scans, we're getting root growth in that sidewalk, and they're actually being able to support pretty good tree growth there. So here's tree 2, this is all the root growth, tree 3, and all the roots are intertangled. This is way beyond the time we could separate the roots, so they're massively intertangled here. But we're still working on this data set, which is huge. So, conclusions. Ground truth studies appear to corroborate GPR, root counts, and root depth, and best root accuracy. The thicker the root, the more accurate, the higher, the whiter the parabola is on the screen that I see. Tree roots go to the full depth of the structural soil. GPR is very useful, non-destructive, and what I'm really excited about is I can go over it again. I can sample it last year, I can sample it in 2 years, and see where things have changed, what's the root depth, how far they expanded. And that's a really beneficial thing without destroying the roots. And what we're very excited about is to revisit our model of soil volume needed to support a tree. And now with GPR, we could actually see where the roots are. Instead of modeling where we think they are, we can actually empirically determine where roots are and how much soil volume they are colonizing, and correlate that with tree growth, and to see if where we need to change or tweak our model to make it more accurate in terms of allowing landscape architects and contractors and horticulturists to say, if you want to grow a tree this size, you need to have this amount of soil volume in this area, or this amount of in this area with this amount of precipitation, if you want to allow that tree to get this size. You can't put it in a 4x5 box and expect it to get to what you envision. So we hope to come up with design guidelines that determine the volume of soil necessary to support trees in different parts of the country, geared to different precipitation. So we've been working on this, and this is something we'll be working on in the next few years. So we're very excited about this new work. Also, just the last slide is that there are always these places that, you know, how is this tree alive? You know, there are all these places that, you know, I say, well, you really need to give a tree a lot of soil to allow it to grow to some design size, and someone will always point to this. Well, look, there's that tree. It's got nothing. It's in, you know, it's in a 3x2 opening, and why, you know, it's growing fine, and it is growing fine. And I suppose it's the hot dog water that gets put in there. But I don't really know. But now, another thing we're going to be doing, Tom Whitlow and Barb Neal, and working on looking at tree response to different soil square areas, basically what appears to be the soil volume. And we have trees that are in, you know, narrow spaces apparently, moderate spaces, and like in parks. And in general, trees that appear to be in smaller spaces are growing less well, but there are always some outliers that are growing what appears to be narrow spaces, but are growing really well. Now what we hope to do is take the GPR and see where are the roots. Are they in someone's basement? Are they in the sewer? Are they in the you know, there's, you know, we can actually find that as opposed to saying, well, maybe it's in this, you know, sewer system here. If it's in the sewer system, you know, good luck to it. It's going to be having all it needs for years to come. Hot dog water notwithstanding. So we're going to be looking at some of these, you know, just places where we can't understand how a tree is alive. And I hope that when we see where the roots are, it will give us some more insight into what allows some of these trees to grow that shouldn't be growing. So that's basically the story where we are now. We're going to be using this. My fellow authors, Jason Grabowski from Rutgers, Gary Raffel from who owns the souped up tricycle, and so instead of buying one, he has all the software and experience. I just buy his surfaces, and he's just loves to work with us. And Tony Mucciardi from the U.S. Naval Academy and Tree Radar Inc. He developed this whole tree radar system. So we hope to continue working on this. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Nina, you didn't mention how the radar system reacts to stones or other mineral elements in the soil.
Well, it reacts to, everything has a dielectric. Everything has a reactivity or a conductivity. And so one of the things when you're working, you basically calibrate the machine with some known, we put some rebar in at exactly certain depths so we can actually calibrate the machine. And soil is well known as a dielectric of 13, but structural soil, we found, when we first did the scan, it just didn't seem right. The depths were not right, and so we recalibrated, and it has a dielectric of 9. So we had to figure those out. And these are homogeneous soils. So when you have a lot of junk in the soil, you see those. You see utilities, you see stone is really not very conductive, so you don't really see that. But you'll see some waviness of the pattern, but it's those things that have more electric conductivity that you'll see in a better way. And there's a whole lot more in terms of the guts of this machine and how it works. I am going to try to explain to you. Yeah, Ken.
You seem to get a sort of a yes or no answer. You don't get any information about root diameter or anything?
No, you don't. You don't. It picks it up or it doesn't pick it up. So anyway, when I look on the screen, which is not that's just like a raw data, sometimes I'll see a really strong, but you see, when you see a really strong parabola, you say, whoa, that's a big root. But it also might mean that you're crossing the root, perpendicularly. Sometimes, what if you're alongside a root, so you're not going to get the same strong signal. We've also done concentric rings around trees, and there's new software which is enabled to actually connect the dots instead of just having points. It's just connect the dots and then give you areas of probability of roots. Yes, there are roots there, but here's an area where you have greater probability. So we'll be working with this new software that actually gives you more of a root scan, virtual root scan, instead of just the crosshairs. But it doesn't give you a diameter. Yeah, Tara.
So kind of following up with that, what about functionality? So you could actually have roots there, but they aren't servicing the tree in any...
Well, what's interesting is if the roots are dying, you won't get a good signal. I mean, because once water, it's basically water. So you could actually look at turnover over time. That's I really haven't thought about it. I mean, I've been thinking about doing this iterative study where you go back again and back again. But when your roots die, you lose the signal. Because the water will. Yeah, Jen.
How far below does the tree roots go in a lawn? Are they intercepting the root zone?
Depends on the soil.
Okay. But are they
Depends on the
also?
soil bulk density and I mean, we don't see grass roots at all.
Okay.
Okay, grass roots are just too tiny.
But are they towards the surface where they're competing with the turf grass?
They can be right at the surface. They can be, depending on the bulk density and the texture of the soil, you can get roots further down. But yeah, they can be right up at the surface.
And do you think that they would be good at intercepting nitrogen losses from?
Sure. Yeah, that's what tree roots do. I'm sure they'd be good at maybe functional. I don't know how, in terms of competition. That's what your study's in.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was just looking at your photos and they looked really nice to be able to quantify lawns that have that system where you're training the roots to go under the pavement and into the lawns. Are they effective at minimizing nitrogen losses from an urban system? That would be a nice way to look at
Yeah.
it.
Could be. I mean, I think there's a lot of potential for this. Unfortunately, for those of you who work with vegetables, or, herbaceous plants, you just don't have roots big enough for this. So it's the woody plant people who are going to make out on this. But, apples, grapes, any woody plant, you have to get a reasonable sized root. And then, in fact, I remember a couple of years ago when we had the air spade, the tool, I went out to Freeville because someone wanted to look at broccoli with the student. And to uncover the roots of broccoli. And we got this thing with a huge compressor behind it. And I turned this thing on, the broccoli was up in the air. It was like, whoosh. So we needed, it took that broccoli right out the air. So I don't think it was it's really on or off. So, yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
The example you gave about the Green Star parking lot, how much do you attribute that change in root growth from the structural soil to the, I don't know what that
Fill.
other soil,
Yeah, right.
to the roots doing better in structural soil versus there's just simply a transition, and we know that roots don't like to leave or make a transition.
But what happens in pavement is that you have a purposeful compaction. So it's not just soil. It's highly compacted soil to meet engineering specifications. And then we put the structural soil in, and you can still compact it to meet engineering specifications, but because it creates that rigid lattice, roots can go to the full depth. So it's not just soil next to it. It's really compacted soil. We don't expect to have anything below, let's say, 4 to 6 inches in that, unless there's a major crack or they didn't compact it well. Sometimes that happens. If you have poor construction, you have often better tree growth.
Has there ever been a study where you would almost split the soil down the middle, so one side of the roots are growing on the structural soil and one side is on the compacted soil?
We haven't done exactly that. We had in the Green Star, we had them going into different soils, but we have 15 years of research showing that structural soil works. That wasn't really the purpose of this. It was really looking at ground penetrating radar. So we have interest, we keep on looking at structural soil and how to use it under turf, for instance, and other kinds of things, but we've never done exactly that. Yes?
Some tree species are more notorious for sidewalk evil than others, and you can compare that.
Well, I have some different opinions about that. I mean, often Norway maples are given bad rap, but most of the time Norway maples make up 50% of the tree population in urban areas. In the Northeast, in New York State, minimum 30%, 50%. So you have many, many more trees of one type, which, sure, they make up 50%, they're going to be more of the trees that heave the sidewalk. Also, the fact that you have highly compacted subgrades, we call it, under the sidewalk is going to push all the roots at the surface. Actually, you saw that tree that I painted white is really at the surface. So it really has a lot more to do with the fact that we've compacted these soils to meet engineering specifications, and that pushes roots up to the surface, doesn't allow them to go deep. So we've actually caused the problem by the way we construct sidewalks, and then we put trees into these situations, and if they break out of their constricted area, they occupy the interface between the concrete and the base course. There's 4 inches of concrete, and then there's an area, an interface, where you get some precipitate, you get some water basically forming on the bottom of the concrete, and tree roots can take advantage of that. And that's where we see roots, when they're under sidewalks, they grow right under the concrete. It's an interface, a little freeze thaw, they get it held in, and then they make it there. They don't go down deep, because they can't, because the bulk density, the porosity is such that they cannot go down. So maybe there's a little bit in terms of species, silver maples, Norway maples, those that are typically can tolerate wetter soils and have a shallow root system, but the shallow deep thing has more to do with soil than it has to do with the species. Yeah.
When you have a situation like we picture there,
Yeah.
how does enough water get to the roots?
I have no idea.
You have
Well, I mean, that's an interesting thing. We've got all kinds of sewers, and the guy is putting the water from the hot dogs into the tree every day. He just sits under the tree. Water moves laterally. I mean,
Are there enough cracks in the surface to get any water in?
I don't know. I mean, there's a lot that's really counterintuitive to this thing being alive.
Yeah.
And that's why we want to see where the roots are, because maybe they are in some kind of pipe where they're getting something we can't see. And there's a lot of interest in finding out about that. I'm just curious. Yeah.
Sorry, I have voice also.
It's okay.
It's my field. It would also appear to me that if you're in a street tree type situation, we're in this confined type of space where we know that roots will even sort of go down and come back up and do all kinds of funky growth. Can you account for that somehow, and basically not being able to count a root twice or 3 times or 4 times?
I mean, it comes up and goes back.
I mean, yeah, when they're stuck in this box, I would imagine they don't have a lot, they don't do the normal sort of outward distribution of
Well, I
their
think we
system.
caught these at the time. We're actually now taking out a tree between each tree, so we're reducing the competition. Whether we do ground penetrating radar in the same place again, I'm not sure. But I think we were in a situation of 5 years growth where we're still
Headed
sort of
outward.
outward bound. We didn't see any of that when we excavated the roots, that they went inwards. Everything was kind of going outwards. That's a good point. Yeah, Jenny.
You showed one photo of forest pavement. Is that becoming more common in the urban landscape? Why don't we have more forest?
Well, I showed a picture of concrete block pavement, which is not mortared, that's porous. But we have porous asphalt, and that's a whole other talk, another time, where we are growing trees in porous asphalt in parking lots with structural soil underneath. And we're actually now seeing the fact that the trees in the porous asphalt, and we have trees in traditional asphalt, are actually growing better than those in traditional asphalt. So there is some, and also there's water recharge into the ground, which is the other good part about that, stormwater catching. Yeah, we have a parking lot downtown which we do this with. Okay, thanks everybody.
This has been a production of Cornell University. On the web at cornell.edu.